Alright, here we're going to look at the energy transfer in an ecosystem. We're going to start with food chains. In a food chain, energy moves from one organism to another when it's eaten. So when one organism eats another, that's where it gets its energy from. Each step in this transfer of energy is known as a trophic level. And trophic levels are given names. The main trophic levels are producers, consumers, and decomposers. The energy flow from one trophic level to another is what we call a food chain. And a food chain is very simple and direct with only one path. It involves one organism at each trophic level. And this isn't how it happens in a real ecosystem, it's just a simplified version of the chain of what gets eaten by what. In a food chain, producers are things that get their energy from the sun, autotrophs, things like plants. The next trophic level, higher than producers, is primary consumers. Primary consumers eat producers, so these are only herbivores. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers, so these are things that eat meat, eat other consumers. Tertiary consumers are going to be your things like lions and tigers, big organisms that have to eat a lot of food. They eat secondary consumers. And then lastly, we have decomposers. These are things like bacteria and fungi, and they break down dead organisms. Their job is to recycle things back into the environment. Now, food chains are very simple. We can make a little more complex model. We call it a food web. Food webs are more complex. They involve a lot of organisms. And the arrows in a food web point in the direction of the energy transfer. So the direction that the arrow points is very important. Now we're going to look at 3 different ways of representing an ecosystem. There are 3 different pyramids that you can draw to represent an ecosystem. The first one is a pyramid of numbers. And a pyramid of numbers is made by counting the organisms in each trophic level. So if there's more than one organism in the same trophic level, you're going to add those numbers together. Usually there are fewer organisms in higher trophic levels, things like tigers and bears. Those things, there's usually fewer of them than there are, say, producers like grass and trees. But there are some exceptions, things like parasites, where many ticks could live on like one single organism. Even though they would be getting their energy from that organism, so they would be at a higher trophic level. And also insects. In the rainforest, you have big plants, things like trees, and many insects can eat that one tree. And so you can have a situation where things at a higher trophic level, there's actually more of them than there are the things at the lower trophic level. Now, there are some problems with the pyramid of numbers. It can be difficult to decide which trophic level an organism belongs to. Things like people can eat both plants and animals, so are we primary consumers or secondary consumers? It can be difficult to decide. And also, the size of the organism may vary. So just by counting how many of them there are, that doesn't tell you how big they are. So a thing like a tree is counted equally with one blade of grass, and that can be kind of confusing. The second pyramid we're going to look at is a pyramid of biomass. The mass in this pyramid, the mass of all the organisms is measured. And so we're going to use grams to measure mass. In a pyramid of biomass, there are some problems as well. For example, some organisms might provide more energy than others. You know that in different foods that you eat, things like spinach provides you with more energy than things like chocolate. Even though chocolate has a lot of sugar in it, it doesn't give you lasting energy. And so it can be difficult to tell how much energy something provides just by looking at how much it weighs. And it can also be difficult in a pyramid of biomass to put things into trophic levels, just like we had that problem with the pyramid of numbers. Now the last pyramid we're going to look at is a pyramid of energy. The pyramid of energy measures the energy output of each trophic level. And only 10% of the energy in each level gets passed on to the next level. And there's a lot of reasons why only 10% gets passed on, why not all of it gets passed on. For example, a consumer might not eat all of its prey. Like if a tiger kills an antelope, it's not going to eat the bones, it's not going to eat everything on the animal, and so some of that energy is going to be lost. And also, when an organism is moving, it's releasing heat. that energy that it's releasing as heat can't get passed on to the next trophic level. It's being used up, and so some of the energy gets lost that way. All right, now we're going to look at some examples of these things. Here we have an example of a food chain. There are two different types of food chains here. You can see that the lowest trophic level, or producers, moves up from there. And you can look at the difference between that and a food web. In a food web, we have more than one organism at each trophic level, but we can still see the producers, the primary consumers, the secondary consumers. It's just not as clear. Notice the direction of the arrows. The arrows always point from the thing giving the energy to the thing that gets the energy. So it can be tempting to want to do it the other way around, point the arrow from the deer to the grass, because deer eat grass, but that's not right. You're going to point the arrow in the direction of the energy flow. Now down here we have some examples of each pyramid. Let's look first at the pyramid of numbers. Make sure that on your notes you fill these in. This pyramid of numbers is going to be, say, maybe in a rainforest, a forest of some kind. We have an ecosystem that exists on one tree. And so this bottom level will always be producers. So here at the bottom, this will always be producers. The only producer in our ecosystem for this example is a tree, so that's 1. So we make a very small box to represent 1. In our next trophic level, that's our primary consumers, we have all the things that eat the tree. And so here we have 500 ants and 500 beetles, so that's 1,000 total. So we make a wide box to represent that 1,000. In the next trophic level, we have our secondary consumers, which happen to be birds. Birds are going to eat the ants and the beetles. There are only 10 of them in our ecosystem. And then up at the top, we have the snake. We have one snake that lives in the tree, and it eats the birds. So this is our pyramid of numbers. Make sure that the width of the boxes represents how many organisms you have. Now we're going to look at a pyramid of biomass for that same ecosystem. So we're going to take that one tree that we had at the bottom. This is still the tree. And we're going to weigh how much it weighs. We'll say it weighs 1,000 grams. Probably it'll weigh more than that, but we'll say 1,000 grams. And we're going to take the mass of the ants and the beetles all together. We'll say they weigh 100 grams. Our mass of the birds is going to be 90 grams. Now remember, this is counting not just the mass of one bird, but the mass of all 10 birds, so they weigh 9 grams apiece. And then the mass of the snake is going to be 10 grams. And notice the width of the piece of the pyramid represents how much. So we start wide at the bottom and get narrower as we go up. Then the last pyramid we're going to look at is the energy pyramid. And in our energy pyramid, we start out with energy from the sun. You don't have to draw that in, but just be aware that that's where it comes from. And we're going to measure our energy in kilocalories. Calories are a measurement of energy, but they're very, very small. And so we're going to measure them in 1,000 calories at a time, which is a kilocalorie. So we start out with 10,000 kilocalories from the tree, and we know that only 10% can get passed on to the next level. So if you move the decimal over, that gives you 10%. So that's 10% of 10,000 would be 1,000 kilocalories. That's how much energy gets passed on to the ants and the beetles. And then we have, in the next level, 100 kilocalories gets passed on to the birds, and only 10 kilocalories gets passed on to the snake. So those are our pyramids for this ecosystem.